I think the lunch was good, and I myself I feel heavy, So we will try to do our best to make this presentation together successful. First of all, I put my title clear here that I'm an engineer, you know. So, and particularly this is very important just to realize I'm an engineer and I'm interested to be in your meeting, and it's my honor to be in your meeting here. Starting from a little story about myself, because every young scientist there, he need to know how life is difficult in science and technology when you come back home. I'm graduated from Egypt. I had all my degrees in Egypt. And I have a degree in global positioning system application, which related to space sciences to a certain level. That means I'm a geomatics engineering in my first degree. Then I went to South Korea. I stayed as a professional after my PhD. I worked there for 7 years. And I do a simulation on 32 parallel computers at that time. Writing my own softwares, doing this, doing that. I'm so proud of myself, 12 SCI publication in the first 4 years in very reputable journals. And then I decided to go back home. My father, he called and say, hey, my son, come back. I need to see you beside me here if something wrong happened to me. I say, okay, let me go to watch my family and to respond to my family commitments. So I went back. I'm setting up my system there. I request to build my cluster. So they gave me 2 computers. And I was frustrated because at that time 32 parallel computers give me 1 day to do 1 run. So can you imagine how many time I need, and if even the processors themselves are able to do the simulation for me. So I decided to fly back to South Korea because I have an open ticket to go and come back whenever I want, because I'm a professional enough to the people to hire me. So I work on one of the universities. And I said, no, it's time to go back to Africa to change what you don't like. So I came back and I work in the African Union Commission since 2006 till today. And what I'm doing research, science and technology policy. It's not anymore space, it's not anymore GPS, it's not anymore intelligent traffic services, but I'm trying to make the road for the next generation of scientists to come much better than we receive it. So I'm not going to start again my presentation to say the head of states and governments decided to allocate 1% GDP for science and technology. And science and technology in the forefront of our policies and this and that, and maybe if they caught me there in the commission, I may lose my job, but this is the reality. Because when we talk to our policymakers, we inform them everything is great and nice, and we can make it. So the head of states and government, they decide 1% GDP in 2007. But we never advise them where this 1% GDP could come from. And this is including all of us as scientists, because we never be able to transfer science into tangible income to our nation. But others, they were able to do it. So what we are doing now, we have, after this long introduction, and I believe my time, 4 minutes is gone, I need to go fast to my presentation. So it's enhancing policy, environment, and mechanism to support research translation in Africa. I set up a committee in my office because actually I'm not going to present for you the policies we had in the African Union to tell you we have health policy, we have research policies, we have this, we have that. Rather than that, I said, let me identify what is the problem in research translation. So I set up a committee from my colleagues in the office, and we start to discuss really what is the research translation. So we need to see a problem statement there, because if you don't have a problem statement, you are not able to solve it. You are going to solve everything except your problem. What are the challenges to be able to solve this problem? And then we develop a preliminary policy analysis. I'm saying a preliminary because it's done over a very short time, and the people participated was very narrow group. So I'm going to present for you some output of the stakeholders of research translation, again to identify the pillars and the sub-pillars which we needed to ensure that there is a comprehensive research translation system, and to identify the policies and the strategies that we need to be in place to ensure that there is a research translation. And finally, we try to identify the needed infrastructure and system and mechanisms, rather than starting to say research translation is important, which is true, but this is the pathway to be able to do a research translation. So research translation, it has many definitions. One of them, it's the USA National Institute of Health. Research translation is movement of discoveries in basic research to application. So we need to take ourselves from basic into application. Wolf, which is an eminent scientist, in 2015, he defined it to be from bench to the bedside. That means enterprises harnessing knowledge from basic science to produce new drugs, devices, and treatment options for patients. So we try to investigate, this is the model we are using. There are different models. There is 5 steps model and there is 2 steps model. Because of the time allocated myself and my team to this presentation, we just try to use the 2 steps model. So we need to transfer the new understandings of disease mechanisms from the laboratory into the development of new methods and for diagnosis, therapy, prevention, and their first testing in a human. That's the first step to do the translation. The other one is to translation from that results from the clinical studies into everyday clinical practices and health decision making, and finally we achieve the goal for our translation, which is improved health. So again, this is another definition for the problem statement, and it is really a failure that we are not able to translate research, which we have a lot of research in our labs, into the daily life and to practices and policy. And you can see many people stated this statement similar to that. WHO director, the medical scientists, and public health policy makers are concerned that scientific discoveries of the past generation are failing to be translated effectively into tangible human benefits. So this is the problem we are facing here. This problem is not new. In 1936, William Higgs, the Commonwealth Minister of Health, he gave a similar statement. So that means since that time, from 1936 till today, we are going in circles to address the problem of transferring the know into do. So I hope what I'm presenting here will help or put some stones in the road when the people can identify much better pathway. So we start to see what is the problem does exist. We have a high cost problems, lack of funding, career insecurity, practitioner burnout, shortage of qualified investigations, weak participation by stakeholder, conflict of interest, IP issues, and more. So this is the why we have this problem and does exist. And you see, it's not organized because it just came from the people themselves. When we are running the discussion in my team, we are able to identify this is as the why for the problem does exist. So in order to be methodological and use a methodology to implement to solve the problem, we find that this is the why this problem we have, and then we start to identify challenges. And the challenges we are facing here is public participation, information system, workforce training, regulatory and standards, funding, and others. So what we need to do actually This is research translation, and this is the goal, the strategic goal, from the bench to the bedside. So the exercise which we developed to understand what is the pillars we need to ensure that there is a research translation. Breaking down these pillars into sub-pillars to make the issue easier for us when we are doing the analysis, because you can't analyze a great block, you need to break it down to small blocks. Breaking it down to small blocks, we need to identify the physical infrastructure, the systems, the mechanisms, which if it does exist at a certain moment, we will be able having stronger sub-pillars that strengthen the pillars, and finally to ensure that there is a research translation to take place. So what happened after that? We need to do this in reflection or to project the role of each of the stakeholders in this pathway. We develop an elementary or a preliminary stakeholder analysis where we identify the consumer and research participants, professionals, local administration, national policy maker, regulatory bodies, industry funders, among others. So if any research translation is going to take place, we need to consider, when we are doing the analysis, that the role of each and individual stakeholder. So that three pillars which I identified earlier, which is research infrastructure, technical and professional competencies, and enabling environment, we break them to their own respective sub-pillars. So this is the sub-pillars which are coming out of each of the pillars themselves. And in order to do so, we use the problem tree methodology to identify the sub-pillars for each of the pillars themselves. You will find that strengthening existing R&D institution at the national level, or on the national level. If you go any meeting, you will find such a statement coming, but we never come to say how we are going to strengthen them. If you go to speak about setting up a comprehensive IP system, every time we need to say we need to reflect on the intellectual property rights, and we need to find ways that the intellectual property rights help the needy to access to better life. So again, this is one of the issues we need to identify. We have a lack in capacity building of the critical mass of practitioners. So we need to see how to improve the quantity and the quality of the practitioners themselves to ensure that we are able to attend to the problems we are facing. Develop an advocacy programs and outreach at all levels. The problem, we are a scientist. We never speak the language that either the public can understand or the politicians. So whenever to speak to them, they are listening and they say, thank you very much, we will consider this in our next meeting. But reality is, we never been able to convey a message in the way that politician is expecting us to give. So again, we need to reflect on these sub-pillars. So what happened now, not to be long because of the time, we identify the research translation pillars, which is 3. We identify different sub-pillars for each of the pillars themselves. And then we take the sub-pillars themselves, because still these sub-pillars need to be implemented or need to be strengthened or need to be found a way to ensure that these sub-pillars does exist. So we identify the physical infrastructure needed, and the physical infrastructure needed, and we identify the systems. We identify the systems and the policy to come in the second analysis. So this analysis, we try to identify the policy gaps, which does exist in some of our member states in Africa, recalling that this conference is mainly to address the challenges in the African continent. So we have a gaps in policy in R&D infrastructure. We have a problem. When you go to the labs in Africa, it's very weak. We don't have a basic infrastructure there. So we need to enhance the participation of private sector in addressing the issues related to R&D infrastructure. The strengthening long life learning, because when the people is going out of universities, they never come back to universities or to build their own capacity. So this is the policies and the strategies which should be in place, and we need to have our own checklist to ensure that either it exists or not. If it is not existing, we need to develop such strategies and policies. So after that, we develop what we call finite element analysis exercise, and it's too much to civil engineering or to engineering analysis for things. Because usually when we are doing policies, we never consider the interaction between the policies and the strategies and the systems and the mechanisms needed for the implementation of the system. So breaking it to its smallest part, you will be able to build a structure or a policy structure that's capable to respond to the challenge you identify. So using the finite element analysis, we identify the physical infrastructure, the systems, and the mechanisms needed for each of the sub-pillars. So by this exercise, at this junction, we have the first one, which is enhancing and building research infrastructure. This is the sub-pillars being identified. And the next step, which is the third part of the analysis, is to identify the physical infrastructure, the systems, and the mechanisms. So we run the analysis to identify the needed physical infrastructure, system, mechanisms. And this is an example of the output. So if we strengthen existing national R&D infrastructure, that means we need to strengthen current universities. We need to invest policy on R&D infrastructure, and the mechanism is to improve budget allocation now for R&D, maximize the use of existing infrastructure, tax waivers on R&D materials and equipment, research grants, among others. So this is just an example of the output of the analysis. For pillar 2, which we identify the 6 sub-pillars which currently presented to you, again we run the same practice. And this is the output there of the analysis of the second sub-pillar. For the benefit of the time, because I have like 2 minutes or 1 minute something, this is the third pillar which we developed the analysis for it. So finally, after this exercise, we are able to identify the pathway from the research translation from the bed to the bench, which is having the pillars themselves, the sub-pillars, the physical infrastructure, systems, and mechanisms needed to ensure that we are able to transfer research. Finally, this is the observation on this exercise, and as I stated before, I apologize, it was very short time. It took us 3 days only to develop that very quick model for building this policy for research translation, and I believe it needs to be more enhanced. The pathway was developed by an exercise conducted under a limitation of time and participation, by considering the 2 steps translation model. So if we are going to identify more perfect pathway, that means we need to go for the 5 translation model. The 2 translation model need to be broken down to its micro level, which I just mentioned right now. The stakeholder analysis need to be more detailed by addressing their role and impact in the pathway, and ensure their participation in such exercise is vital. So rather than just conducting this exercise in my small group in my commission, it should be going out to communicate with the stakeholders. But at least we try to identify a methodology which may be tested in a larger size. Checklists need to be in place, because if you say we need to have this strategy and this policy, you need to be fully aware about national policies and strategies which does exist and how it's efficient to be implemented and into which level. So this checklist is very important to have. Micro-analysis to be conducted on each of the systems and mechanisms for the perfection of the pathway, because it's a loop of improvement. You start the system and then you keep monitoring it to ensure that you every time are able to respond to the bottleneck and to take a mitigation actions or intervention when it's needed. I would like to say thank you very much indeed for your patience. Thank you, Chair.